teenagers.
It does. Makes Nikki fall in love me more than anyone in the fucking world. What are you doing? I wish for $1 billion. Stop! Nikki!
Rip my
The story opens inside a small cafe, where Bear is sitting across from a young woman, trying to gather every bit of courage he has. His voice is soft, nervous, and almost too sincere as he tells her that from the very first moment he saw her, something about her stayed with him. He admits that he has carried these feelings quietly for a long time, and now he cannot keep them buried anymore. But before the emotional confession can go any further, his friend Ian suddenly bursts in from another table, and loudly says that what Bear just said might be the most painfully embarrassing thing he has ever heard. That immediately ruins the mood. It turns out Bear is not actually confessing his love to the girl in the cafe. He is only rehearsing what he wants to say to the woman he really likes, Nikki. The girl listening to him does not seem offended, though. In fact, she finds the whole awkward little performance strangely sweet. Bear, however, is mortified. Seeing how nervous he is, she suggests that maybe he should give Nikki something thoughtful, maybe a gift that feels personal. But before she can finish the idea, Ian interrupts again and dismisses it. According to him, Nikki is not the kind of woman who would be won over by a present. Once the girl leaves, Ian leans into his usual role as Bear's overly confident advisor. He tells Bear that he needs to stop acting so scared and start being more direct. Then he suggests Bear should call Nikki by her nickname, Freaky Nikki. Bear instantly shuts that down because he knows Nikki cannot stand that name. Ian does not care. He keeps pushing, telling Bear that he should invite Nikki out for drinks that very day and stop waiting for the perfect moment. Bear, on the other hand, wants to hold off until trivia night. In his mind, that setting would feel casual, comfortable, and less intense. But Ian is not interested in careful timing. He insists that Nikki probably likes Bear too, and that the only thing stopping him is his own habit of thinking everything to death. Later, Bear returns home, expecting an ordinary evening. Instead, he walks into something devastating. His pet cat is lying lifeless on the floor. As the shock settles in, Bear realizes what happened. He had accidentally left his medication somewhere the cat could reach it, and the cat must have swallowed it. The guilt hits him immediately. Completely broken, Bear breaks down crying. After that, he quietly cleans up the mess, moving through the room with the numb sadness of someone who knows the mistake cannot be undone. Some time later, Bear is lying alone on his bed, drained and silent, when his phone rings. It is Nikki. She apologizes for hardly speaking to him earlier and asks if he is still planning to come to trivia night. Bear tells her he does not think he can make it, but Nikki keeps talking, trying to pull him out of his sadness. Then, out of nowhere, she screams because she has just dropped her crystal necklace down the drain. Hearing the panic in her voice, Bear changes his mind and agrees to come. On his way to meet everyone, Bear stops at a shop and buys a necklace for Nikki, hoping it might replace the one she lost. While looking around, he notices a strange little toy on display called Wish Willow. Something about it catches his attention. The shopkeeper notices him looking and immediately warns him not to buy it. She explains that it is a collectible, but not the fun kind. Almost everyone who purchases one ends up wishing they had never taken it home. Bear does not take the warning seriously. He laughs it off, assumes it is just some creepy sales talk, and buys the toy anyway. That night, trivia night is already in full swing when Bear arrives. The group is there together, a mix of friends and coworkers, including Ian, Nikki, and Sarah. Ian keeps nudging Bear, encouraging him to finally make a move and talk honestly with Nikki. But Bear keeps freezing whenever the moment comes close. He and Nikki take a few shots, laugh together, and share the kind of easy back and forth that makes Bear feel like there might actually be something between them. Still, every time he tries to steer the conversation toward asking her out, someone interrupts. First Ian gets involved, and later Sarah joins them too. At one point, the group raises their drinks in memory of Bear's cat. Sarah clearly did not know what happened until that moment, and when she realizes, she immediately hugs Bear to comfort him. Bear accepts the hug, but his attention keeps drifting back toward Nikki. By the end of the night, Nikki says she is completely worn out. Bear offers to drive her home, and she accepts. Before they leave, Nikki notices a homeless man nearby and gives him some money. The small act of kindness makes Bear smile quietly, only deepening the feelings he already has for her. During the drive, Nikki brings up his cat and tells him she is sorry. The conversation becomes more personal after that. She tells Bear that she is taking a couple of weeks off from work because she wants to focus on her writing. She admits that she feels trapped and frustrated by her current life, like she needs distance from everything before she loses herself completely. Then she says something that catches Bear off guard. She tells him he is the only person she feels she can really open up to. Bear starts to say that he feels the same way, but his thoughts get tangled. Then he remembers the necklace and tells her he got her something. Nikki reacts in a quiet, uncertain way, saying gifts make her nervous. Her response throws Bear off. The confidence he barely had disappears again. When they reach Nikki's house, she brings up Sarah. She says Sarah had been asking about him all day and wants to know how Bear feels about her. Bear quickly says he only likes Sarah as a friend. Nikki points out that it is very obvious Sarah has a crush on him. Then she adds that when she herself has feelings for someone, nobody can ever tell. It feels like a door opening, just slightly, but Bear does not know how to walk through it. Nikki begins to leave, but Bear stops her one more time. This is the moment where he could finally say what he has wanted to say all along. Instead, his nerves take over. He cannot get the words out, so he changes the subject and starts talking about random things that do not matter. Nikki does not really respond to it. She simply says good night and starts walking toward her house. Bear panics. As she moves away, the worst possible words come out of his mouth. He calls after her, Freaky Nikki. Nikki immediately turns around and walks back to the car, clearly irritated. She tells him not to call her that ever again. Then she looks straight at him and asks the question he has been avoiding all night. Does he like her? Bear goes completely quiet. Instead of admitting the truth, he stumbles over his answer and says he thinks they are good friends. Nikki takes that in, says okay, and quietly heads inside. Bear sits there frustrated, knowing he just ruined the chance he had been waiting for. Then he notices the Wish Willow toy sitting nearby. He looks at the writing on it and reads that breaking it will make one wish come true. Bear does not take it seriously. In a casual, almost careless moment, he opens the toy, snaps it in half, and makes a wish. He wishes that Nikki would love him more than anyone else in the entire world. Bear is about to drive away when something strange happens. He looks up and sees Nikki standing outside her house, staring at him. She walks back toward the car as if something inside her has suddenly shifted. Then she reminds him that he said he had something for her. Bear, caught off guard, tells her he left it at home. Nikki does not seem bothered. Instead, she asks if he wants to come inside, saying that after losing his cat, he must be feeling pretty upset and probably should not be alone. Bear sits there for a moment, completely confused, his eyes shifting from Nikki to the broken wish willow in his hand. Something about the timing feels impossible. He looks back at her and quietly asks if she is all right. For just a tiny second, Nikki's expression changes, almost like she has caught herself doing something she does not understand. There is a flicker of awareness in her eyes, like she knows this is strange too, but then, just as quickly, that look disappears. The moment passes. She acts as if nothing unusual happened at all and simply climbs into the car. Bear still has no idea what to make of it. Before he can even ask another question, Nikki starts crying. Her voice breaks as she tells him that her father has cancer, and according to her, he does not have much time left. That is why she does not want to be alone tonight. The confession immediately shifts Bear's concern away from the weirdness of the moment. Whatever confusion he felt gets buried under sympathy. Nikki looks scared, vulnerable, and desperate, so Bear decides not to push her. The two of them drive back to his place. Once inside, Nikki slowly looks around the house, taking in the room like she is studying every little detail. Then she smiles and says, almost happily, that the place smells like him. Bear is not sure how to respond to that, so he tries to keep things normal. He tells her she can take the bed and get some rest, while he will sleep out on the sofa. But Nikki does not want that. She asks him to stay in the room with her. More than that, she wants him to sleep in the same bed. Bear hesitates at first. The situation already feels too sudden, too emotionally heavy, and too strange. But Nikki keeps insisting, and eventually he gives in. Then, without much warning, she removes her shirt, leaving Bear stunned and unsure of where to look. He is nervous, overwhelmed, and clearly not prepared for the night to go in this direction. As they lie together, Nikki slowly moves closer to him. The distance between them keeps shrinking until the tension finally turns into a kiss. At first, Bear lets himself fall into the moment. For him, this is something he has imagined for a long time. But suddenly, Nikki pulls back as if she has just woken from a dream. Her face fills with fear. She immediately apologizes and says she is having a panic attack. Bear instantly panics too, but not because of the kiss. He is worried about her. He stays with her through the night, trying to keep her calm and make sure she feels safe. Nikki eventually settles down, but Bear cannot sleep. His mind keeps circling back to the wish willow, the strange warning from the shopkeeper, and the bizarre shift in Nikki's behavior. Unable to let it go, Bear starts searching online for wish willow. He finds message boards and old discussion threads about it. Some people write about it like it is a real cursed object, something that grants wishes but twists them in disturbing ways. Others dismiss the whole thing as an internet myth, the kind of creepy collectible story people exaggerate for fun. Bear does not know what to believe, but after what he has just seen, the toy no longer feels harmless. When he gets up, he notices Nikki is awake. She asks where he went, sounding oddly fragile, and tells him to come back and sleep beside her. Bear does not argue. He returns to the bed and lies down next to her, even though he is still wide awake inside his own head. The next morning, Bear wakes up and finds Nikki in the kitchen. At first, he cannot fully process what he is seeing. She appears to be performing some kind of unsettling little ritual connected to his dead cat. The scene is disturbing enough to make him freeze. When Nikki notices him, she acts like it is nothing strange and explains that it is only a memorial. She says it with a calmness that does not make Bear feel any better. Later at work, Ian pulls Bear aside, eager to know what happened after trivia night. He is curious, nosy, and excited in the exact way Bear expected him to be. Bear tells him that Nikki suddenly confessed her love, that they went back to his house, and that things became intimate between them. But even while saying it, Bear cannot sound happy. Something about the whole situation feels wrong to him. Nikki is not acting like herself. While Bear and Ian talk, Nikki stands at the counter nearby, staring at them almost constantly. Bear lowers his voice and tells Ian more of what happened. He mentions her father's cancer, the kiss, and how she seemed to snap out of it all at once, but he leaves one detail out completely. He does not say anything about the wish willow. Ian listens, then offers a more ordinary explanation. He says Nikki could be under serious emotional pressure, especially with her father being sick, or maybe she took too much medication and was not fully in control of herself. Either way, Ian thinks Bear should probably encourage her to see a doctor instead of assuming something supernatural is going on. By the time evening comes, everyone begins leaving work. Bear expects Nikki might want to go home with him, especially after everything that happened between them. But instead, she walks out with Ian without saying anything to Bear. That leaves him unsettled all over again. Later, Bear calls Ian from home and asks whether Nikki seemed weird while they were together. Ian says no. According to him, she seemed perfectly normal, and Bear is probably worrying too much. He tells Bear there is nothing to be concerned about. Not long after the call, someone knocks on Bear's door. He opens it and finds Nikki standing outside. She explains that what happened the night before was because she was high on some medication. She says that is why she acted so strangely. Then, before Bear can fully respond, she tells him she knows he has feelings for her. Bear still struggles to say the words directly. Instead of confessing, he asks whether she likes him too. Nikki answers without hesitation. She says yes. Then she goes even further and tells him she loves him. From that point on, Bear and Nikki officially become a couple. For a while, everything looks exactly like the life Bear had been secretly hoping for. They go out together, watch movies, spend evenings on dates, and stay up talking late into the night. Nikki gives him attention, affection, and the kind of closeness he always wanted from her. To Bear, it feels almost unreal, like the version of love he had kept imagining has suddenly become real. But the perfect feeling does not last. One evening, while they are having dinner at a restaurant, Bear casually asks how her father is doing. The question immediately changes Nikki's mood. Instead of answering, she quickly moves the conversation somewhere else. Bear notices the dodge, but before he can press her on it, his phone starts ringing. It is Ian. Bear tries to ignore the call, but Ian keeps calling again and again. Nikki notices and tells him he should answer. Bear finally picks up, and Ian's voice is tense. He tells Bear that Nikki's father is not sick at all. He does not have cancer. In fact, he is completely fine. Then Ian adds something even worse. A few weeks earlier, Nikki told Sarah that she only saw Bear as a little brother. That information hits Bear hard. Everything suddenly feels connected in the worst possible way. The fake story about her father, the sudden affection, the strange behavior, the wish. Bear becomes more convinced than ever that something is deeply wrong. He slowly returns to the table, trying to hide the panic rising inside him. Nikki smiles at him like nothing has happened and hands him a gift. Bear opens it. Inside is a tiger's eye stone. Nikki tells him it belonged to her mother and explains that it is meant to give confidence and willpower. Bear asks why she is giving it to him. Nikki looks at him with unsettling sincerity and says she loves him more than anyone else in the world. The words land like a warning. They are almost exactly what he wished for. Bear stares at her, then carefully asks if her father really has cancer. The smile drops from Nikki's face. She freezes, staring at him without blinking. Then she starts repeating, "No, no," as if the question itself is tearing something open inside her. She stands up, visibly unraveling. Bear quickly tries to calm her down. Nikki begins crying and says they were having such a nice date, as if his question has ruined everything. Bear, realizing she is spiraling, gently gets her to sit back down. He tells her it does not matter, even though both of them know it absolutely does. Later, back at Bear's house, the mood is completely different. They lie in bed together, but Nikki is strangely still beside him, almost lifeless, like a body with no energy left in it. Bear cannot relax, but exhaustion eventually takes over. Before dawn, when it is not even 4 in the morning, Bear wakes up and sees Nikki curled in the corner of the room. She is shaking, crying, and staring into nothing. Then she screams at him, asking why he does not love her as much as she loves him. Bear tries to speak gently and tells her to come back to bed, but Nikki only tells him to go back to sleep. He feels helpless, so he does what she says, but soon after, she wakes him again with another scream. This time, she is standing in front of him holding a vase. She tells him it is for his cat. Then, as if that explanation should make everything normal, she lies back down beside him. The next morning, Bear goes into the bathroom and looks at himself in the mirror. That is when he notices something wrong with his hair. Someone has cut it while he was asleep. He returns to the bedroom and confronts Nikki, and from her reaction, he realizes she is the one who did it. Bear tries to explain it to her as gently as possible, almost like he is speaking to a child. He tells her that cutting someone's hair while they are sleeping is not okay, that it is strange, and that she must never do it again. Nikki looks ashamed and apologizes. For a second, she seems embarrassed by her own behavior. But then she gives him a long, unnatural smile. She kisses him softly and tells him she loves him. Bear tries to leave the house, desperate to get to work and put some distance between them. But when he reaches the front door, he finds it sealed shut from the inside with tape. The sight unsettles him completely. He manages to pull everything loose and get the door open, but the entire time, Nikki stands inside the house, silently watching him. Her expression does not change. She keeps staring at him with the same frightening smile, frozen in place. The moment becomes even more disturbing when she urinates on herself without moving, still standing there as if her mind has slipped somewhere far away. At work, Bear is visibly shaken. He tries to act normal, but he is falling apart inside. When he opens his lunchbox, he finds food packed with cute little notes and photos tucked inside, as if Nikki is trying to smother him with affection. Sarah notices that something is wrong. She can see he is not himself, and she comes over to comfort him, unaware of just how terrifying Bear's situation has become. Bear tries to steady himself and begins eating, but his mind is still stuck on everything Ian told him. As Sarah sits beside him, he finally opens up and repeats what Ian said about Nikki's father being perfectly healthy and about Nikki once describing Bear as more of a little brother than a romantic interest. Sarah listens carefully, and the more she hears, the more unsettled she becomes. She admits that the whole thing feels strange. One moment Nikki barely seemed interested in Bear that way, and then almost overnight, they were suddenly together and acting like an intense couple. To Sarah, that kind of sudden shift does not feel normal. She tells Bear that something is definitely off with Nikki's behavior. Before the conversation can go any deeper, Sarah's father arrives and brings terrible news of his own. He tells Sarah that her college application has been rejected again. The words hit her hard. Sarah completely breaks down, crushed by the disappointment. For a while, her own pain takes over the moment, and Bear tries to be there for her as best he can. Eventually, Sarah comes back over to Bear. Emotionally drained, she leans her head against his shoulder, trying to turn the sadness into a joke so she does not fully fall apart. For a brief second, it feels like a small, quiet moment of comfort between them, but then Sarah notices something sticking out of Bear's jacket. It is a folded note. Curious, she pulls it out and begins reading. The note mentions Bear's dead cat. At first, Bear does not understand why Nikki would leave a note about the cat with his lunch. Then the horrifying realization slowly hits him. He looks down at the sandwich he has been eating, and everything connects in the worst possible way. Nikki did not just pack him lunch. She used the meat of his dead cat to make it. The thought makes Bear's stomach twist instantly. He cannot hold it in. Sickened and horrified, he rushes away and throws up. Later, as Bear is heading home, Ian stops him. This time, Ian is not joking around or giving him careless advice. He looks genuinely frustrated. From Ian's point of view, Bear is taking advantage of Nikki while she is clearly emotionally unstable. Ian has noticed how strange things have become, and now he is keeping his distance from Bear. The easy friendship between them feels strained. Bear tries to defend himself, but Ian is not convinced. To test him, Ian invites Bear to a boys' night out. Nikki is not invited. Ian makes it clear that if Bear really is not using Nikki, then he should be able to spend one night away from her. Bear agrees, partly because he wants to prove Ian wrong, and partly because he desperately needs space. After Ian leaves, Bear notices the Wish Willow box again. On it, he sees a phone number printed along the packaging. Desperate for answers, he calls it. Someone picks up. The voice on the other end is not mysterious or dramatic. It sounds bored, casual, almost annoyed, as if this is just another ordinary customer service call. Bear asks about the wish, and the man tells him plainly that the love created by Wish Willow is not real. It is not a miracle. It is a curse, but he says that usually does not matter to people as long as they get what they asked for. Bear, shaken, asks if the wish can be changed. The man tells him that is impossible. Once the wish has been made, it cannot be rewritten. There is only one option. Bear can cancel it, but Bear hesitates. He does not want to cancel it, at least not immediately. Some part of him is still trapped inside the fantasy that Nikki loves him. The man then explains the truth more brutally. As long as Bear remains alive, Nikki will stay trapped in this twisted state forever. She will continue being controlled by the wish, forced into a version of love that is turning her into something broken and terrifying. Then, as if to make Bear understand the nightmare more clearly, the call lets him hear Nikki's screams through the phone. They are horrifying. Bear's fear takes over. He rushes back home as fast as he can. When he gets inside, he finds Nikki still there, in the same disturbed condition. She is drenched in sweat, covered in vomit, and completely wrecked. As soon as she sees him, she starts crying and apologizing again and again, like she knows something terrible has happened but cannot fully control herself. Bear is shaken by the sight of her. He tells her to go take a shower. While she is in the bathroom, Bear stands outside the door, barely able to speak. Finally, he asks her the question that has been eating him alive. He asks if she cooked his cat. From inside the bathroom, Nikki suddenly goes silent. The silence says enough. Bear, horrified and heartbroken, tells her she cannot do things like that. He is not angry in a normal way. He sounds broken, scared, and disgusted all at once. Nikki eventually answers in a calm, obedient voice, calling him honey and saying okay, as if she has just been corrected for making a small mistake instead of doing something monstrous. Trying to move past the unbearable moment, Bear tells her about the boys' night out. Nikki immediately says she will come with him. Bear reminds her that it is supposed to be a boys' night, meaning she cannot be there. Nikki's mood changes instantly. She screams that this is strange because according to her, Sarah told her she was going too. Bear realizes there is no safe way to argue with her. Helpless and exhausted, he gives in and says she can come. Nikki's reaction flips again, and she starts screaming with excitement. At the bar, Ian is furious the moment he sees Bear walk in with Nikki. He pulls Bear aside and scolds him for breaking his promise. Bear has no good answer. He knows he was supposed to come alone, but he also knows refusing Nikki has become dangerous. They return to the group, where everyone tries to act normal. The friends chat, joke, and laugh, but Nikki's energy is completely wrong. Every time Bear says even the smallest funny thing, she laughs far too loudly, much harder than the joke deserves. The others notice. The atmosphere becomes uncomfortable, with everyone pretending not to see how strange she is acting. Eventually, they start playing Jenga. When Nikki's turn comes, she has to tell a story. Instead of choosing something light or funny, she begins retelling Hansel and Gretel. But as she speaks, she twists the fairy tale into something violent, grotesque, and deeply disturbing. Her version becomes so dark that the entire bar seems to quiet down around her. No one knows whether to laugh, interrupt, or simply wait for it to end. Then it is Bear's turn. His dare is simple: kiss the girl sitting next to him. That girl is Sarah. Before Bear can even react, Nikki stands up. She does not scream at first. She calmly walks behind Sarah, grabs her chair, and pulls it away. Then Nikki sits beside Bear herself, positioning herself as the one he is supposed to kiss. The quiet calmness of it makes the moment even more uncomfortable. Then Nikki suddenly explodes. She starts yelling that everyone there is going to die because none of them understand what real love is. None of them have ever felt anything as powerful or pure as the love she has for Bear. The whole group goes silent. Nobody knows how to respond. And then Nikki smiles. She says she is only joking. For half a second, it almost feels like the tension might break. But then her expression changes again. The madness comes rushing back. Nikki grabs a glass bottle, smashes it, and begins hitting herself in the head with the broken edge right in front of everyone. Blood sprays as people scream and scramble backward. Bear jumps in and somehow manages to stop her before she can do even worse damage. He gets her out of the bar and takes her to the hospital, desperate for help. But the hospital refuses to take her in, leaving Bear with no choice but to bring her back home. At the house, Bear tries to reach the real Nikki buried somewhere inside her. He tells her she is frightening everyone, that this is not who she is, and that something is wrong. But Nikki only smiles at him with that same unsettling affection and tells him she is his freaky Nikki. The name hits Bear like a nightmare coming full circle. He goes to the bathroom to get away for a moment, but Nikki follows the conversation from outside and asks why he cannot simply tell her that he loves her. Bear finally cracks. He says this is what he thought he wanted, but it is not what she wanted. Nikki argues back, insisting that she did want this, that she does love him. The argument grows more intense. Bear begs her to be herself again. He keeps asking for the real Nikki, not this version created by the Wish. Nikki breaks down into hysterical crying. Bear manages to calm her, or at least he thinks he does. Then something even stranger happens. Nikki begins moving backward toward the bedroom, but her feet twist in an unnatural way as she walks. The movement is so wrong that Bear can only stare in fear. Nikki tells him not to be scared. She says she would never hurt him. But Bear is already terrified. He tells her he thinks she should sleep alone and that he will check on her in the morning. Nikki does not accept that. The idea of being separated from him upsets her immediately. Bear realizes he has no real choice, so he ends up sleeping beside her again. In the middle of the night, Bear wakes up with Nikki lying peacefully in his arms. For once, she looks calm, almost normal. Then his phone lights up with a message from Sarah. She tells him she needs to see him right away. Bear replies that he cannot come, but Sarah warns him that if he does not meet her, she will come to his house herself. That leaves Bear with another problem. If Sarah comes there, Nikki might see her. And if Nikki sees Sarah, there is no telling what could happen. So Bear quietly tries to slip out of bed without waking Nikki. He moves carefully, slowly, barely breathing. But just as he is about to leave, Nikki opens her eyes. This time, something is different. The wildness is gone. For the first time in what feels like forever, Bear sees the real Nikki looking back at him. Her eyes are full of tears, terror, and exhaustion. She knows what has been happening. She knows what the other version of herself is capable of. In a whisper, she begs Bear to kill her. She tells him she does not want that other version to wake up again. Bear is devastated. He cannot process what she is asking, and he cannot bear to stay there either. Broken and overwhelmed, he leaves the house and goes to meet Sarah. When he finds her, Sarah tells him what she believes is happening. From her perspective, Nikki is manipulating him. Sarah says Nikki hates her father, so the cancer story never made sense. it was just another strange lie. She insists that anyone looking at the situation from the outside can see how absurd and dangerous it has become. Nikki does not need Bear enabling her. She needs serious help. She needs therapy. Sarah then pulls out the acceptance letter from the college she has always dreamed of attending. Until this moment, she still had not even opened it. For a few seconds, the nightmare surrounding Bear almost fades into the background. Sarah opens the letter, and when she realizes she has finally been accepted, both of them share a small, emotional smile. It is one of the only gentle moments Bear has had in a long time, but that relief does not last. Sarah then tells Bear something that completely turns his world upside down. She reveals that Ian and Nikki had been secretly involved with each other for quite a while. According to Sarah, Nikki may have started everything not because of love, but because she wanted to hurt Ian. She believes Nikki dragged Bear into this mess as part of some twisted revenge. Bear barely has time to understand what Sarah is saying. Before he can react, Nikki suddenly appears and charges toward the car. In an instant, the situation turns horrifying. She grabs Sarah and violently smashes her head against a brick again and again with terrifying force. It happens so fast, and with such brutality, that Sarah dies right there. Bear goes completely still. He cannot speak. He cannot move. He just stares, frozen in shock, as if his mind has disconnected from what his eyes are seeing. Nikki walks over to him afterward with disturbing calmness. She tells him this is his fault. He made the wish, so now he has to help her clean up what happened. Bear is too broken and terrified to fight back. With no clear way out, he helps Nikki hide Sarah's body. Later, Bear drives alone through the night. On the passenger seat beside him lies Sarah's college acceptance letter, now stained with her blood. The sight destroys him. Sarah had just gotten the future she wanted, and moments later, it was taken from her. Bear finally loses control and screams in agony, completely crushed by guilt and horror. Desperate to undo everything, Bear drives straight back to the shop where he bought the Wish Willow. This time, a different shopkeeper is there. The man sees Bear falling apart and immediately understands that something terrible has happened. In a calm but serious tone, he asks Bear what he has done. Bear tells him he needs to reverse the wish. The shopkeeper explains that canceling it is possible, but Bear already knows the cost. For the wish to end naturally, Bear would have to die. However, the shopkeeper also mentions another possibility. If someone else makes a wish that directly contradicts Bear's wish, there is a chance it could override the curse. Bear does not waste a second. He buys another Wish Willow and tries to make the wish himself, hoping to undo what he started. But when he attempts to break it, the toy does not snap. That is when he understands the rule. He cannot be the one to fix it. Someone else has to make the wish. Bear rushes to find Ian. Ian is already terrified by the time Bear reaches him. He has received dozens of disturbing messages from Sarah's phone, all telling him to come to Bear's house. Ian knows something is wrong, but he does not understand how bad it really is. Bear starts to leave, then turns back because he realizes Ian is his only chance. He tries to explain everything as quickly and clearly as possible. He tells Ian about the Wish Willow, about the curse, about Nikki, and about how the wish forced her into this horrifying obsession. Then Bear hands Ian the toy and begs him to use it. All Ian has to do is wish for Nikki to be free. But Ian does not believe him. To Ian, Bear sounds completely unstable. The whole story is too absurd, too impossible, and too insane to accept. In frustration, he takes the Wish Willow and mocks the situation by wishing for billions of dollars instead. Then he snaps the toy in half. A second later, money begins raining down from the ceiling. Ian freezes. Now he knows Bear was telling the truth, but the realization comes too late. The one chance to save Nikki has been wasted. Bear's last real hope disappears right in front of him. He returns home, already terrified of what he might find, but nothing could prepare him for the sight waiting inside. Sarah's dead body has been placed in the room like some grotesque display. The scene is bloody, disturbing, and completely inhuman. Bear stands there unable to move, horrified by how far everything has gone. Nikki is inside too, spiraling deeper into madness. She screams at Bear, demanding to know why he does not love her the way she loves him. Then, in another burst of violence, she slams her own head, hurting herself in front of him. At that moment, Ian arrives and starts knocking at the door. Bear sees that Nikki has a gun in her hand. He tries to calm her down, telling her that everything will be okay. He begs her to put the gun down. But Nikki keeps screaming, completely consumed by the cursed love controlling her. When Ian finally steps inside, she turns and shoots him without hesitating. Bear panics. With Ian bleeding nearby and Nikki still unstable, Bear shouts the only words he thinks might stop her. He tells her he loves her. For the first time in that moment, Nikki calms down. Bear moves closer and hugs her tightly. On the outside, it looks like he is comforting her, but inside, he has already made a decision. He knows the curse will never stop while he is alive. If he cannot undo the wish through someone else, then there is only one way left. He goes into the bathroom and tries to use the gun on himself, but when the moment comes, he cannot pull the trigger. His hands shake and fear takes over. Then he looks toward the medicine cabinet. He opens it, grabs every sleeping pill he can find, and swallows them all at once. From the other side of the bathroom door, Nikki's voice comes softly, telling him that everything is okay. But almost immediately, Bear realizes what he has done. Panic hits him. He tries desperately to make himself throw the pills back up, but it is already too late. The medication is inside him, and time is running out. Then he hears a familiar sound from outside the bathroom. Another wish willow snaps. Bear suddenly smiles. He steps out and sees that Nikki has found the last hidden wish willow in the house. She has made one final wish. She wished that Bear would love her exactly as much as she loves him. For a quiet moment, the two of them simply look at each other. No screaming, no fighting, no panic. Just a silent, intense stare between two people trapped at the center of a nightmare. Then they move closer and kiss. But Bear has already swallowed the pills. The overdose begins taking effect. His body weakens and suddenly he collapses to the floor. Within moments, Bear dies. Nikki is destroyed by his death. The grief hits her with unbearable force, and without Bear, she no longer sees any reason to keep living. She prepares to end her own life too, but just before she can do it, Bear's death finally breaks the curse. Nikki suddenly snaps back into herself. The madness disappears. The real Nikki returns, confused, terrified, and shattered. Slowly, the memories begin flooding back into her mind. Piece by piece, she remembers what happened while the curse had control over her. She remembers the obsession, the violence, the blood, and the people who died because of the wish. And now, fully awake again, Nikki finally understands the horror of everything she has done. At the center of obsession, the setup is almost laughably simple. A guy likes a girl. He cannot tell her properly. He gets embarrassed, frustrated, and desperate. Then he finds this strange little object called the One Wish Willow, breaks it, and makes the kind of wish that sounds romantic only if you do not think about it for more than 2 seconds. He wishes that Nikki would love him more than anything, and that is basically where the whole movie starts tightening its grip. What I like about this premise is that it does not waste time pretending to be more complicated than it is. The movie knows this is a wish gone wrong story. It knows we have seen cursed objects before. We have seen characters ask for something they should not ask for, only to discover that magic has a really cruel sense of humor. But Obsession still manages to make that old idea feel uncomfortable again, mainly because the wish itself is already kind of disturbing. Bear does not wish to be better. He does not wish for courage. He does not wish for a real chance with Nikki. He wishes for Nikki to want him. That difference matters, because at first you can understand where he is coming from. He is awkward. He is clearly insecure. He is stuck in that painful place where someone wants to say something honest, but keeps swallowing the words at the last second. There is a little bit of second-hand embarrassment in watching him, because you can feel him trying to build up the courage and failing over and over again. And honestly, that part feels human. A lot of people know what it is like to freeze when emotions get too real. But then the wish happens, and suddenly the movie asks you to look at that desire from another angle. What Bear wants is not love in the normal sense. It is not mutual. It is not earned. It is not even really Nikki choosing him. It is Nikki being forced into the shape of his fantasy. And the scary thing is, the movie does not immediately play that like some huge moral speech. It just lets the situation unfold, and the more it unfolds, the more wrong it feels. At first, the wish almost seems like it worked in the way Bear wanted. Nikki comes back into his life with this sudden intensity. She wants to be near him. She says the things he probably imagined hearing. She gives him the attention he was too afraid to ask for. For a few moments, you can see how Bear might fool himself into thinking this is some miracle. But the film is smart enough to make the miracle feel off right away. There is something unnatural in the speed of it, something too intense, too needy, too much. Nikki is not slowly realizing feelings she had buried. She is suddenly overwhelmed by something that does not feel like her. And once you notice that, the romance completely dies. What is left is this horrible, tightening sense that Bear has opened a door he has no idea how to close. That is where obsession gets under your skin. The premise is not scary because of the object itself. The One Wish Willow is almost silly when you first hear about it. It sounds like the kind of weird little thing you would see in a novelty shop and laugh at. But once it works, that silliness becomes creepy. The movie takes something that should feel harmless and turns it into the source of a very personal nightmare. And the personal part is important. This is not a giant supernatural disaster. The world is not ending. There are no ancient demons explaining rules for 20 minutes. It is just one bad wish, one relationship, and two people trapped in the consequences. That smaller scale makes it feel more intense. The horror stays close to Bear and Nikki, which means every uncomfortable look, every strange line, every sudden mood shift feels bigger than it should. The best thing about the setup is that it gives the movie a strong emotional engine. Bear wanted control without admitting that he wanted control. Nikki becomes the result of that. She is not just the girl who becomes obsessed. She is the living consequence of his wish. Every time she gets more intense, more unpredictable, or more frightening, the movie is basically throwing Bear's own desire back in his face. And that makes the whole thing feel mean in a really effective way, because the wish does come true. That is the cruel joke. Bear gets exactly what he asked for, not what he needed, not what would make him happy, exactly what he asked for. Nikki loves him more than anything, and it is horrifying. That is why the premise works so well. It is simple enough to understand instantly, but the longer you sit with it, the uglier it becomes. What starts as an awkward crush turns into a supernatural punishment. What looks like wish fulfillment becomes a nightmare about desire, consent, and the danger of wanting someone so badly that you stop thinking of them as a person. And for a horror movie, that is a pretty strong place to begin. What's funny about Obsession is that if you strip away the cursed object and all the blood and screaming that comes later, the beginning almost plays like the setup for a messy little romantic comedy. You have Bear, this painfully awkward guy who has clearly been carrying feelings for Nikki for a long time. You have the workplace dynamic, the friend giving advice, the nervous build-up to a confession, the little gift he wants to give her, and that classic moment where the character just needs to say the thing out loud. And of course, he does not. That is where the movie starts to feel real in a way that is slightly uncomfortable. Bear is not written like some smooth movie crush who says the perfect thing at the perfect time. He fumbles. He overthinks. He waits too long. He gets right up to the edge of honesty and then immediately backs away from it. You can almost feel the movie teasing a version of itself where this becomes a sweet, awkward love story, but that version never arrives. Instead, Curry Barker takes all those familiar romantic beats and lets them rot. The cute confession scene becomes a humiliation. The sentimental gift becomes part of the curse. The crush does not become a relationship through honesty or emotional growth. It becomes a nightmare because Bear chooses fantasy over vulnerability. That is what makes the opening work so well. The movie understands the language of romance just enough to corrupt it. Trivia night, workplace banter, the nervous car ride, the almost confession. These are all things that could belong in a completely different film. But here, every one of them slowly starts feeling wrong. And honestly, that is more interesting than if the movie had opened as pure horror right away. Because for a little while, you can see what Bear wants the story to be. He wants the easy movie version. He wants Nikki to suddenly realize she has loved him all along. He wants the big emotional payoff without the terrifying possibility of rejection. He wants romance to happen to him without having to actually risk anything. That is such a small human flaw, but the film turns it into something poisonous. The romantic comedy setup is basically the bait. It makes you understand Bear's fantasy before the movie punishes it. And once Nikki's behavior changes, those earlier cute moments look different. The awkward crush stops feeling harmless. The hesitation stops feeling innocent. The wish turns the entire romantic framework into something deeply uncomfortable, because in a normal romance, love is about two people moving toward each other. In Obsession, only one person gets to choose. That difference is what flips the whole genre on its head. Nikki does not fall for Bear because she sees him differently. She does not choose him after some heartfelt realization. She is pulled into his desire by force, and the movie lets that forced romance become uglier scene by scene. So the film is not just using romance as decoration. It is attacking the fantasy of romance, where one person believes their feelings are so strong that they deserve to be returned. That is a very specific kind of entitlement, and Obsession takes it to the most extreme possible place. The result is this weird, uncomfortable blend where the beginning almost invites you to laugh at Bear's awkwardness, but later, you start questioning why you were laughing at all. The movie makes the familiar feel unsafe. It takes the softest parts of a love story and sharpens them into horror, and that is why the setup sticks. Obsession does not become scary by leaving romance behind. It becomes scary by showing what happens when romance is built on control instead of choice. Obsession is very aware that it is playing with one of the oldest horror ideas in the book. Somebody finds a strange object. They make a wish. The wish works. Then, very quickly, they realize they should have left the thing exactly where they found it. We have seen that structure before. A lot. Horror has been warning people about magical shortcuts forever, and honestly, most of the time, the lesson is pretty obvious. Do not mess with creepy little objects from mysterious shops. Do not trust something that promises you the one thing you want most, and definitely do not make emotional decisions while holding a cursed-looking stick. But that is also part of why this movie is fun. The One-Wish Willow has that perfect low-rent cursed object energy. It does not look like some ancient artifact that belongs in a museum. It feels more like something you would find in a shop between crystals, charms, incense, and other things you are not fully sure are serious or just decoration. There is something almost funny about it at first, like this is the thing that is going to ruin everyone's life, and then it does. That contrast helps the film a lot. The object itself is not grand or intimidating. It is small, weird, almost silly, but horror often works best when something harmless-looking becomes dangerous. The movie does not need to over-explain it with a huge backstory or a long mythology dump. It just lets the wish happen, and once it happens, the situation becomes horrible enough on its own. In a way, that simplicity is what makes it feel like an old-fashioned cautionary tale. Obsession is not trying to reinvent the entire cursed object formula. It is taking that familiar structure and asking, okay, what if the wish was not for money or fame or power? What if it was for love? Or more specifically, what if it was for control over love? That tiny shift makes the formula feel nastier, because the wish is personal. It is not some abstract supernatural deal. It directly changes another person. Nikki becomes the cost of Bear's mistake, and that makes the curse feel more intimate than usual. The horror is not coming from a monster hiding in the woods or a demon crawling out of a wall. It is coming from a wish that rewrites someone's emotions and traps both people inside the result. And the movie is smart enough not to treat the wish as a clean fantasy that simply goes too far. It feels wrong almost immediately. Even before things become violent, there is this strange discomfort in the air. Nikki's sudden affection is too fast, too intense, too unnatural. Bear gets what he asked for, but the movie makes sure we never fully enjoy it with him. That is where the be careful what you wish for idea actually lands. A weaker version of this story might have spent too much time enjoying the fantasy before turning it dark. Obsession does not really do that. It gives Bear just enough time to believe, maybe, that this is what he wanted. Then it starts tightening the screws. Every sweet moment carries something rotten underneath it. Every romantic gesture feels infected. And that is the cruel joke of the whole setup. The wish does not betray Bear by twisting his words in some random technical way. It gives him exactly what he asked for. Nikki loves him more than anything, completely, intensely, without balance. Without freedom, without a self outside him. That is not a loophole. That is the horror. So yes, obsession is built on a familiar formula. You can feel the shadow of older wish-gone-wrong stories hanging over it. But the movie works because it chooses a wish that is emotionally ugly from the start. It turns the cursed object trope into something less about magic and more about entitlement. The One-Wish Willow may be the supernatural trigger, but Bear's desire is the real cursed object here. And that is why the formula still has bite. The movie is not scary because it tells us wishes can go wrong. It is scary because, in this case, the wish going right is already the worst possible outcome. Bear is a really interesting character because the movie almost tricks you into feeling bad for him before slowly making you question whether you should. At the start, he seems harmless, maybe a little pathetic but not dangerous. He is shy, awkward, and clearly trapped inside his own head. He likes Nikki, but instead of just being honest, he keeps circling around the truth. He rehearses, he hesitates, he waits for the perfect moment. And then, when the moment is right there in front of him, he backs out. That kind of thing is embarrassing to watch, but it is also believable. A lot of people have been there in some form. Not with a cursed wish object, hopefully, but with that fear of saying the wrong thing, ruining a friendship, or hearing the answer they do not want to hear. So early on, Bear feels like someone you can understand, even if he is frustrating. But then the movie starts pulling that sympathy apart, because Bear's problem is not just that he is nervous. It is that he is passive in a way that becomes selfish. He does not want to risk rejection, but he still wants the reward of being loved. He wants the emotional payoff without the emotional courage. And when he gets the chance to make a wish, he does not wish to become braver. He does not wish to be more honest. He does not wish for clarity. He wishes for Nikki to change. That says a lot about him. And what makes it worse is that once the wish starts working, Bear does not immediately reject it. He knows something is off. Anyone would know something is off. Nikki's behavior is too sudden, too intense, too unnatural. But Bear still lets himself enjoy parts of it. He still steps into the fantasy, even though the fantasy is clearly built on something wrong. That is where the character becomes uncomfortable in a good way. The movie does not turn him into a cartoon villain. He is not sitting there laughing like some evil mastermind. He is scared. He is confused. He is overwhelmed. But being overwhelmed does not erase what he did. And I like that obsession does not give him an easy pass just because he looks weak. Weakness can still hurt people. That is kind of the whole point with Bear. His cowardice is not neutral. His self-pity is not innocent. His inability to deal with his feelings creates damage, and then his refusal to fully take responsibility makes everything worse. He keeps acting like the nightmare is something that happened to him, when really it happened because of him. And Michael Johnston plays that balance pretty well. Bear is irritating, but he is not unbelievable. You can see the fear in him. You can see the guilt starting to creep in. You can also see the part of him that still wants to pretend this somehow counts as love. That is a difficult line to walk, because if Bear becomes too sympathetic, the movie loses its bite. If he becomes too openly awful, the moral tension disappears. Instead, he stays messy. He is the victim of the consequences, but he is also the person who opened the door. He is trapped, but he helped build the trap. He is terrified of Nikki, but Nikki would not be in this state if he had not wished away her choice in the first place. That makes watching him really uncomfortable, especially when he starts realizing what he has done, but still cannot bring himself to act with any real strength. He is always a step behind the truth, always reacting too late, always hoping there is some easier way out, and honestly that feels painfully human, not heroic, not admirable, human. Bear is the kind of horror protagonist who makes you yell at the screen not because his decisions are random, but because they come from flaws you can actually recognize: fear, shame, desire, avoidance. Wanting something without wanting to pay the emotional cost of asking for it honestly. So by the time the movie fully turns against him, it feels earned. Obsession works because Bear is not just unlucky, he is responsible. Maybe not in the clean, simple way a villain is responsible, but in a more uncomfortable way. He is responsible because he wanted control and called it love. He is responsible because he chose fantasy over honesty. And he is responsible because even when the fantasy became horrifying, part of him still wanted to believe it was his dream coming true. That is what makes him such a strong center for the movie, not because he is likable all the time. Because he is exactly the kind of person who would make the wish, regret it, and still take too long to understand why the wish was wrong from the beginning. One of the more uncomfortable things obsession does is take the nice guy fantasy and drag it into the light. Bear does not look like a threat at first. That is the whole point. He is not aggressive in the obvious way. He is not loud. He is not forceful. He is awkward, quiet, nervous, and kind of sad. The type of guy a movie might normally ask us to root for because he just needs a chance. But obsession is smarter than that. It understands that someone can seem harmless and still be selfish. Someone can be shy and still feel entitled. Someone can look emotionally wounded and still do something deeply wrong. Bear's problem is not just that he loves Nikki from a distance. It is that somewhere in his mind, his feelings start to matter more than her choice. That is where the movie gets nasty, because Bear does not wish for a conversation. He does not wish for courage. He does not wish for the ability to accept whatever answer Nikki gives him. He wishes for her to love him, fully, completely, more than anything. And when you really sit with that, it is horrifying before the horror even begins. The wish turns Nikki into the object of Bear's desire in the most literal way possible. She stops being a person with her own emotional life and becomes the answer to his loneliness. That is what romantic objectification looks like when you push it into supernatural horror. It is not just, I want her. It is, I want her feelings to belong to me. The film does not pause to lecture you about this, which I appreciate. It just lets the wrongness build in the scenes. Nikki's sudden affection is not romantic, even when Bear wants to believe it is. Her choices are not really choices. Her love is not really love. She's being moved by something that was forced onto her, and Bear knows that. Maybe not immediately, not fully, but he knows enough. He sees how unnatural it is. He sees how distressed and unstable she becomes. He sees that the Nikki standing in front of him is not acting from genuine freedom. But for a while, he still lets the fantasy continue because it gives him what he wanted. That is the hardest part to watch, not the blood. Not the screaming, not even the violent moments. It is watching Bear try to convince himself that this can somehow still count as a relationship. Watching him accept affection that he knows was not freely given. Watching him enjoy the dream after the movie has already shown us the dream is rotten. That is where consent becomes the real horror of the movie. Obsession is not only asking, what if someone loved you too much? It is asking, what if that love was never theirs to give? And once that question is in the room, every romantic moment becomes poisoned. A touch feels wrong, a confession feels wrong, intimacy feels wrong, because Nikki has been robbed of the ability to choose. The nice guy myth usually depends on the idea that wanting someone badly enough makes the person deserving. Like patience, longing, and emotional suffering are supposed to earn love eventually, but the film tears that apart. Bear's pain does not give him ownership over Nikki. His insecurity does not excuse what he asks for. His loneliness does not make the wish less invasive. If anything, that is what makes it worse, because this is not a villain taking power for power's sake. This is a weak person using magic to avoid rejection. And in some ways, that feels more believable, more pathetic maybe, but also more disturbing. The movie takes a very ordinary emotional flaw and shows how ugly it becomes when there are no limits. Bear wanted to skip the risk of being vulnerable. Instead, he erased Nikki's autonomy. That is why the movie stays with you longer than a basic cursed object story should. The supernatural part is creepy, sure, but the emotional truth underneath it is the thing that really stings. Obsession understands that control can hide inside romance. It understands that being nice does not mean being good. And it understands that love without consent is not love at all. It is possession. And once the movie makes that clear, you can never look at Bear's wishes innocent again. What makes Obsession more uncomfortable than a normal supernatural horror movie is that the curse does not feel completely separate from real life. Obviously, the One Wish Willow is fantasy. Nobody is walking around actually snapping a magical stick and rewriting someone's emotions, but the relationship dynamic that comes out of it, that feels a lot less imaginary. Once Nikki becomes attached to Bear, the movie starts playing with a very specific kind of relationship horror. Not the loud, obvious version at first, but the kind where someone's entire world starts shrinking around one person. Suddenly there is no space, no privacy, no emotional balance, no room to breathe. Everything becomes about staying together, proving love, needing reassurance, and making sure the other person never leaves. And that is where the film gets genuinely suffocating. Nikki's obsession is supernatural, but the behavior has a recognizable shape. The constant need to be near Bear, the emotional explosions, the fear of abandonment. The way love turns into monitoring, clinging, threatening, and eventually violence. It is exaggerated, of course. The movie pushes everything into horror movie territory. But underneath all that chaos, there is something uncomfortably familiar about the way toxic attachment works. The film understands that obsession is not just loving someone too much. That phrase almost sounds romantic if you say it lazily enough. But obsession shows the uglier truth. Loving someone too much can become control. It can become emotional pressure. It can become a kind of prison where one person's need completely swallows the other person's life. And Bear is stuck in that prison, but the sick irony is that he helped create it. That is what gives the relationship such a twisted edge. Nikki is the one acting frightening. She is the one becoming unpredictable. She is the one whose attachment turns dangerous, but Bear is the reason she is like this. He wanted her love to revolve around him, and now it does, completely, horribly, without any healthy limit. The movie keeps returning to that idea of space, or really, the lack of it. In a healthy relationship, two people still get to remain two people. They can love each other without disappearing into each other. Here, that separation is gone. Nikki's whole identity starts collapsing into Bear. Her emotions are no longer her own. Her reality bends around him. And that is not romantic, it is terrifying. There is also something interesting about how the outside characters read the situation. Ian looks at Bear and thinks he is taking advantage of Nikki. Sarah looks at Nikki and thinks she might be using Bear. Neither of them fully understands what is happening, but both of them sense something rotten in the dynamic. That feels very true to life. People outside a toxic relationship often catch fragments. They notice changes, they see red flags. But they do not always know where the danger is really coming from. In Obsession, everyone is partly right and partly wrong. Bear is being harmed by Nikki's obsession, yes, but Nikki is also being harmed by Bear's wish. The relationship becomes toxic from both angles, not because both people made equal choices, but because the wish has created a situation where love has been replaced by dependency. Bear becomes the center of Nikki's existence, and Nikki becomes the consequence Bear cannot escape. That is why the movie feels so claustrophobic even when nothing violent is happening. The scariest moments are not always the ones with blood or screaming. Sometimes it is just Nikki looking at Bear like he is the only thing keeping her alive. Sometimes it is the way she cannot tolerate distance. Sometimes it is the way Bear realizes that the affection he thought he wanted now feels like a hand around his throat. The film takes codependency and literalizes it. It shows two people trapped in a bond that should never have existed, where one person's need becomes another person's punishment. And because the wish removes Nikki's freedom, the whole relationship is poisoned from the beginning. There is no normal version of it to return to. There is no cute phase before things go bad. The foundation itself is corrupt. That is what makes the horror work. Obsession is not just saying, wouldn't it be scary if your crush became obsessed with you? that would be a much cheaper movie. What it is really saying is, what if the kind of love you thought you wanted was actually control? And what if, once you got it, you realized control feels a lot like being trapped? That question gives the film its bite. Because by the time Nikki's behavior becomes openly dangerous, the emotional horror has already been there for a while. The violence is only the final form of something that was wrong from the moment Bear made the wish. Nikki's transformation is easily the thing that gives Obsession most of its punch, because when the movie first introduces her, she does not feel like a horror character. She feels like someone Bear has built up in his head for a long time. She is warm enough, familiar enough, and casual enough that you can understand why he likes her, but she is also not written like some perfect dream girl floating through the story. She feels like a real person with her own life, her own mood, her own plans, and her own distance from Bear. That matters, because the horror only works if we believe there was a normal Nikki before the wish, and at the start there is. She talks to him like a coworker, maybe a friend, maybe someone who knows there is something unsaid between them. There is this slightly awkward social tension around her and Bear, but it still feels grounded. Nothing about her screams future nightmare. She is just Nikki. Then the wish happens and something in her changes, not all at once in a cartoonish way either. That is what I liked. The movie does not immediately turn her into a screaming monster. At first, it is more subtle than that. She comes back with this strange intensity, like someone has turned the volume up too high on every emotion she has. Her affection is too sudden, her attention is too focused, her need for Bear feels too sharp, and that is where the discomfort starts, because Bear wants this, technically. He wished for this. But the second Nikki begins acting on that wish, the fantasy feels wrong. It is not romantic. It is not cute. It is not the moment where the girl finally realizes she loved him all along. It feels more like something has been pushed into her mind, and her body is trying to obey it. That is a really creepy idea. The movie slowly lets Nikki become more unstable, more unpredictable, and more frightening. One scene she is sweet and almost vulnerable. The next she is staring too hard, reacting too intensely, saying something that sounds loving on the surface but lands like a threat. Her emotions do not move naturally anymore. They lurch, they snap. They swing from affection to panic to rage so quickly that you never fully know what version of Nikki is about to enter the room. And honestly, that unpredictability is what makes her scary. A lot of horror villains are frightening because they hide in the dark, or carry a weapon or stalk people from far away. Nikki is frightening because she is right there, close to Bear, speaking softly one second and completely losing control the next. The danger is intimate. It is in the same room. Sometimes it is sitting across from him, smiling. That is a much more uncomfortable kind of threat. Her obsession grows in a way that feels almost physical. It is not just that she says she loves Bear. It is like her entire body has been reorganized around needing him. The way she moves, the way she looks at him, the way she reacts when she thinks he might pull away, everything starts to feel possessed by this one impossible feeling. And the more intense she becomes, the more the movie turns her into the living consequence of Bear's wish. That is the clever part. Nikki is not scary in isolation. She is scary because every horrifying thing she does points back to what Bear asked for. He wanted her to love him more than anything, and the movie keeps asking, okay, what would that actually look like if it had no balance, no boundaries, no consent, no sense of self? The answer is Nikki after the wish. She becomes affectionate in a way that feels suffocating. Then she becomes possessive, then threatening, then violent. It lets scenes breathe long enough for the audience to sit with how strange everything feels. Sometimes it is just a pause, a look, a sentence that lands wrong, a silence that goes on a second longer than it should. And those tiny moments do a lot of work. There are scenes where nothing obviously horrific is happening, but you still feel tense because the movie has trained you not to trust calm anymore. Nikki might be smiling, but the smile does not relax you. Bear might be standing there quietly, but his silence feels like avoidance. The room might be still, but stillness in this movie never feels safe. That is a hard thing to pull off. A lot of horror movies can make you jump. That is not easy, but it is simpler than sustaining dread. Dread is trickier because it asks the audience to stay uncomfortable without giving them an immediate payoff every few seconds. Obsession is pretty good at that. It knows how to stretch a moment until you start almost wishing something would happen, just so the tension can break. And then, usually, something does happen. But the best part is that the scary moments do not feel completely separate from the quieter scenes. The loud parts grow out of the silence. That is why they land. You have already been sitting there, watching Bear try to pretend things are manageable, watching Nikki become more intense, watching the situation slowly curdle. So when the movie finally snaps, it feels like pressure being released in the worst possible way. The second half especially has this anxious, almost breathless quality, not because it is non-stop action, but because the emotional situation has become so unstable that even slower scenes feel dangerous. You start waiting for Nikki to turn, waiting for Bear to make another weak decision, waiting for someone outside the situation to walk into the wrong room at the wrong time. That waiting is exhausting, but in the way horror is supposed to be exhausting. There's also something clever about how the movie uses awkwardness as part of the dread. Some scenes are uncomfortable before they are scary. You laugh a little because the situation is weird, then the laugh gets stuck because the scene keeps going. The movie does not always give you clean emotional cues. It lets comedy, embarrassment, fear, and disgust overlap until you are not fully sure how you're supposed to react. That uncertainty keeps the atmosphere alive. And honestly, that is one of the reasons Obsession feels more personal than a bigger, flashier horror film might have. The dread is not coming from mythology or huge supernatural rules. It is coming from being trapped in a bad emotional situation and realizing nobody in it knows how to get out cleanly. Bear cannot undo what he did. Nikki cannot stop what has been done to her. Everyone else is close enough to notice something is wrong, but not close enough to understand it. That is a very uncomfortable place to keep an audience, and the movie knows it. It uses silence, pacing, and small behavioral shifts to make the nightmare feel like it is tightening one scene at a time. Even when the story slows down, the atmosphere usually does not disappear. It just sits there, waiting. So for me, the dread is one of the film's biggest strengths. Not every scare is equally effective. Not every slow stretch will work for every viewer, but the overall mood is strong. Obsession has that sticky kind of tension where you feel it in the room with the characters. It makes normal spaces feel unsafe, romantic attention feel suffocating, and silence feel louder than it should. And by the time the movie fully spirals, it does not feel like the horror suddenly arrived. It feels like it was standing there the whole time, quietly waiting for Bear to notice. The horror in Obsession is interesting because it does not rely on just one flavor of fear. Some scenes are built around dread, some are built around shock, some are gross in that very direct, stomach-turning way. And then, every now and then, the movie becomes funny in a way that makes you feel slightly guilty for laughing. That mix could have been a disaster, honestly. A movie like this can easily lose its balance. If it gets too goofy, the horror stops working. If it gets too miserable, it becomes a chore. If it only relies on jump scares, people get tired of the pattern. But Obsession mostly finds a weird little rhythm where the comedy, violence, and discomfort all feed into each other. The jump scares are probably the easiest thing to talk about first, because the movie has some really effective ones. They are not all subtle, and they are definitely not trying to be. Some of them are loud, aggressive, and designed to make the theater react. But what helps is that the film usually builds enough tension beforehand, so the scare feels like a release instead of just a cheap noise. There is a difference. A bad jump scare feels like someone clapping in your ear. A good jump scare feels like the room has been holding its breath, and then something finally breaks. Obsession gets that right more often than not. The door moments, the banging, the shadow movement, the sudden changes in Nikki's behavior, these are simple horror tools, but they work because the movie has already made you nervous. You are watching the frame. You are listening to the quiet. You are waiting for something to go wrong, and then it does. The gore and violence are a different story. This movie can get nasty, not in a polished, stylish, cool horror image kind of way all the time, but in a blunt and uncomfortable way. There are corpses, dead animal imagery, bloody moments, and scenes that feel like they are meant to make you physically recoil. Some viewers are going to love that, some are going to hate it. I get both reactions. Because there is a type of gross-out horror that does not scare everyone. Puke, piss, dead animals, graphic cruelty. For some people, that is disturbing. For others, it is just unpleasant. Obsession does use that kind of material, and depending on your tolerance, it may either make the world feel more rotten or make you feel like the movie is pushing too hard. For me, the stronger horror is when the violence feels emotionally connected. Sarah's death, for example, stands out because it is not just brutal for the sake of being brutal. It feels like the nightmare crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. Up to that point, the obsession is already dangerous, but that moment makes the consequences feel real in a much harsher way. It is aggressive, ugly, and it changes the air around the movie. The brick moment has that same kind of nasty effectiveness. It is one of those horror details that people remember because it is simple and direct, no complicated setup. No fancy explanation, just a brutal object used in a way that makes the audience react immediately. And then there is the Jenga scene. That might be one of the best examples of how obsession turns ordinary things into horror. Jenga is not scary, it is a game, it is almost silly, but the movie uses it as a tension machine. Every small movement feels loaded, every pause feels dangerous. You are not scared of the game itself. You are scared of what the game might trigger. That is smart horror filmmaking. The bar speech is another big one, but for a different reason. That scene works because it lets Nikki take over the room emotionally. It is not just about fear. It is about embarrassment, intensity, and the sense that everyone around her is watching something private spill out in public. It is uncomfortable before it is scary, and that is exactly why it lands. The Pina Colada scene has that same energy, where the situation is almost absurd but also deeply wrong. You kind of want to laugh, but the laugh does not feel clean. It catches in your throat because the movie keeps reminding you that this is not just weird behavior. This is someone being pulled apart by a wish she never made. That uncomfortable humor is one of the film's secret weapons. Obsession is not a full horror comedy. I would not describe it that way, but it has funny moments, and some of them are genuinely funny. Others are funny because your brain does not know what else to do. Nikki says or does something so extreme that the audience laughs, and then half a second later the scene becomes disturbing again. That is a tricky tone to manage. The movie seems to understand that laughter can be part of fear. Especially in a theater, when everyone is tense and waiting for the next horrible thing, even a small awkward moment can make people laugh just to release pressure. Obsession uses that reaction instead of fighting it. It lets scenes become cringeworthy, strange, or absurd, and then it twists the knife. What I appreciate is that most of the memorable moments are not built from huge set pieces. This is not a movie where you remember one giant expensive sequence and forget everything else. You remember smaller things, a phone call, a look, a speech, a shadow, a game, a sound, a body, a sudden act of violence. These moments stick because they are tied to the film's central emotional problem. Bear wanted something unnatural, and now everything around him is becoming unnatural too. That is why the horror execution works. Even when the movie is being bloody or shocking, the best scenes still connect back to the wish. Nikki's violence is not random. Her intensity is not random. The humor is not random. It all comes from this one impossible emotional imbalance that keeps getting worse. Not every scare is perfect. Some loud moments are less effective than the quieter ones. Some gross-out details will push certain viewers away instead of pulling them in. And yes, a few beats may feel like they are trying very hard to make the audience react, but when obsession hits, it really hits. It gives you scenes you want to talk about afterward. It gives you horror that makes a crowd gasp, laugh, cringe, and look away. It understands that fear is not always one clean emotion. Sometimes it is disgust. Sometimes it is nervous laughter. Sometimes it is second-hand embarrassment. Sometimes it is watching something so wrong unfold that you almost cannot believe the movie is going there. And that is where obsession is at its best. Not when it is simply trying to scare you, but when it traps you between laughing, flinching, and feeling genuinely awful about what is happening. For a movie this small, Obsession looks much more confident than it probably had any right to. That is one of the first things that stands out. You are not watching it thinking, okay, I can see the budget every 5 seconds. It does not have that cheap, flat look that a lot of small horror films accidentally fall into. The movie knows how to use what it has. Rooms feel tight, faces matter, shadows matter, background space matters. Even when nothing huge is happening, the frame usually feels like it is holding some kind of threat. I really like the way the film uses shadows and background details. It is not always shoving the scare directly into your face. Sometimes it lets your eyes wander a little. You start checking the corners of the frame, wondering if something moved or if the movie just made you paranoid. That is a good place for a horror film to put you. Once the audience starts scanning the screen on their own, the movie has already won part of the battle. The close-ups are also used well. This is a story built around discomfort, so putting us close to the characters makes sense. Bear's panic, Nikki's sudden emotional shifts, those tiny pauses before someone says the wrong thing, a lot of that would not work as well if the movie kept everything at a distance. The camera makes the relationship feel too close, which is exactly the point. The sound design might be even more important than the visuals. There are moments where the sound feels like it is crawling under the scene rather than sitting on top of it. The banging, the sudden bursts, the quiet pressure in between, all of it helps keep the audience tense. Even the silence has weight. The movie understands that horror is not just about what you see. Sometimes it is about what you are waiting to hear, and when it comes to effects, the practical work does a lot of heavy lifting. The violence feels physical, the bodies feel nasty, the impact moments have texture. When the movie gets brutal, it usually feels like something actually happened in the room, not like an effect pasted over the scene afterward. That makes a big difference. There is some CGI, and for the most part, it blends better than expected. But I do think a few moments push slightly beyond what the film needs. Not enough to ruin anything, but enough that you notice the movie reaching for a bigger effect when the smaller, more grounded horror was already working. Honestly, some of the quiet stuff is scarier than the louder stuff. That brings me to the flaws, because Obsession does have them. The story is familiar. There is no way around that. Even though the execution is strong, you can feel the shape of the movie pretty early. A cursed object, a selfish wish, consequences that spiral out of control. It is a structure horror fans already know. The film makes it work, but if someone says the plot itself is not especially fresh, I would not argue with them. The lore is also pretty thin. Personally, I did not need a huge explanation of the One Wish Willow, but I can understand wanting a little more. The movie gives you enough to follow the curse, but it does not dig very deeply into where the object comes from or why it works the way it does. For some viewers, that fairy tale simplicity will be part of the charm. For others, it may feel underdeveloped. There are also a few logic gaps around the world of the movie. Sometimes it feels like certain characters or adult figures are just not around because their presence would make the plot harder to maintain. You can brush that aside because the movie is operating like a dark fable, but still, you might catch yourself asking a few practical questions along the way. And then there is the ending. I actually think the ending fits the movie emotionally, but I get why it will divide people. Some viewers may want something sharper, darker, or more shocking. Others may feel it brings the story together in a painful way without needing a cheap final twist. For me, the important thing is that the movie does not treat survival like everything is fixed. The damage has already been done. Even if the immediate nightmare reaches some kind of conclusion, nobody walks away clean. That is what gives the final stretch its weight. Obsession is not perfect, but it has the thing a lot of cleaner movies do not have. It lingers. You may question parts of the plot. You may think the hype is a little too loud. You may dislike some of the gross-out choices. But there is a good chance you will still remember Nikki's face, Bear's guilt, the awkwardness of certain scenes, and that sick feeling of watching a fantasy turn into a punishment. That is more valuable than perfection. The film works because its best elements are strong enough to cover the rough edges. The performances are strong. The mood is strong. The sound and framing are strong. The central idea, even if familiar, is emotionally nasty enough to keep digging under your skin. And Curry Barker directs it with enough confidence that the movie feels like a real statement, not just a lucky genre exercise. So the final impression is pretty clear for me. Obsession is a flawed film, yes, but it is also one of those flawed films that feels alive. It has personality. It has nerve. It knows how to make a simple idea feel ugly and personal. And even when it stumbles, it never becomes boring or forgettable. That is why it works. Not because every rule makes perfect sense, not because every scare is flawless, but because the movie understands the emotional horror of its own premise. It knows that Bear's wish was wrong before the blood ever started spilling. It knows that Nikki is terrifying and tragic at the same time. And it knows that the most disturbing thing in the story is not the cursed object. It is the desire behind it. By the end, Obsession leaves you with that uncomfortable aftertaste that good horror often leaves behind. You can walk out debating the ending, the logic, the hype, or the violence, but you are probably still thinking about it. And honestly, for a small horror movie built around one terrible wish, that is a pretty serious achievement.